Would you tolerate a corrupt police department? No? Well, you shouldn't. I know I don't. If you have a drug dealer on the street, 4-time convicted drug dealer, and he's out of jail now, he's back, and you think he's running a crack house on the corner, and you're the cops, and you're in there to investigate him, what happens to the process of investigation if the police plant evidence? Case is thrown out. What happens if the police do an illegal search and seizure? The case is thrown out. What happens if the police do an illegal wiretap? The case is thrown out. Does this mean that the drug dealer is not a criminal? No. You're not letting the drug dealer off the hook. But the cops ran a corrupt prosecution. The system fell apart. It's absolutely imperative that you maintain the integrity of the process when holding people accountable to the rule of law. And as an inspector, that's what I always strove to do. Yeah, I was a hard-nosed SOB with the Iraqis. I didn't cut them one bit of slack. The law didn't allow me to. They were obligated to turn over weaponry. They were obligated to turn over information. And when they chose not to do so, I took them to task. But I guarantee at the same time I took my fellow inspectors to task when we went into Iraq to ensure that they never once deviated one iota from our mandate of disarmament. And that's what we were there to do. The problem comes when a member of the Security Council has a different agenda. When the United States of America has a policy of regime removal that trumps disarmament every time. See, as an intelligence officer, I had to go into Iraq and find out how they hid their weapons. And we had pretty good success. First of all, let me give you a little piece of information that might shock you. We never found one weapon. Never found one weapon. We disarmed Iraq, but we never found one weapon. Now, how can we do that? Well, it's the same way police do things, you know. We sat down with the Iraqis. They lied to us. We knew they were lying, so we sat down and said, tell us your story. 8 hours later, we say, tell it again. 8 hours later, we say, tell it again. Then we bring in some other guys. Tell us your story. Make them tell it again and again. Have 5 guys tell us their story. Then we bring in the first guy. Ahmed said, you're lying. He said that you were actually here on that night. The same way the cops play the game. And Abdul gets a little nervous. He said, no. Ahmed was there. And the story starts to fall apart. We highlight the contradictions, and we confront them with the contradictions. Then we travel around the world. We go to the nations that sold Iraq their material. We get the bills of lading. We get the invoices. We get the letter of credits. And when we go to the Iraqis and say, you declared 3 pieces of equipment that we're concerned about, is that all you had? Yes, Mr. Ritter, that's all we had. Then how do you explain this document that says you bought 20? Oh, those 17. Yeah. And they confess and they lead us to the bodies. That's how we disarmed Iraq. Not by discovering weapons, but by compelling the Iraqis to confess their sins, confess their crimes, and lead us to the material so that we could verify its disposition, and we were pretty darn good at it. By 1996, we had fundamentally disarmed Iraq. 95% of Iraq's weapons capabilities across the board were eliminated. This included 100% of the factories used by Iraq to produce weapons of mass destruction, together with their associated production equipment, and the vast majority of the product produced by these factories. This is a tremendously successful effort, and the inspectors should be applauded. The problem, though, is that the law says 100% disarmament. It doesn't allow for qualitative judgments to be made. So we have 5% missing, unaccounted for. We don't know what its final disposition is. Now, let me cloud this up for you further, because it's not as simple as that. It's much more complicated. I'll give you the example of ballistic missiles. Iraq bought 819 missiles from the Soviet Union. They accounted for them in a certain manner, but in the end, they failed to declare 98 missiles. They held on to these missiles. We pressured them, and finally they admitted guilt. Yes, we hid 98 missiles. We said, well, where are they? They said, well, come in the country and we'll show you. So we show up in Iraq, we go out to a field, and we look at the field. We're expecting to see 98 missiles lined up so we can count them off. And there's nothing there. They said, where are the missiles? And they said, well, we blew them up and they're under the ground. So we had to become forensic archaeologists, dig up the ground, pull the scraps of metal out, and then start recording serial number by serial number by serial number, all the different parts and pieces. And then we went to the former Soviet Union, to the factory that produced these missiles, and said, give us the production logs. And they did. And we matched serial number with serial number, and we're able to account for 96 of 98 missiles. That's pretty darn good. Now there's a little scrap of metal over here that's probably 2 missiles. But because Iraq lied to us, because they cheated, they concealed, we can't give them the benefit of the doubt. Because Iraq lied to us, the standards of verification now become very high. So that while logic says that this scrap of metal is probably the 2 missiles that are unaccounted for, we can't give them to them. So on the books, Iraq is missing 2 missiles. That's part of the 5%. There's a lot of people out there, when I say 95%, they go, well, gosh, Scott, that missing 5%, that could be pretty important. Well, it could be. But I'm telling you right now, it's not. Let's talk about biological weapons. First of all, weapons of biological weapons is sort of a difficult thing. Iraq never really built a biological weapon. Because a biological weapon, as we unfortunately learned in the United States, is something that is going to kill you. To weaponize, for instance, anthrax, Iraq produced liquid bulk agent, the bacterium that is anthrax. But for it to kill you, you have to turn it into a dry powder and then mill that powder down to fine 3 to 5 micron range so it floats in the air, can be sucked into your lungs, and you get the disease and you die. Or you turn into an aerosol mist the same way, so the fine droplets get sucked into your lungs and you die. Iraq never was able to do that. They produced liquid bulk anthrax. Sludge. They put it in a warhead, they put it in a bomb, but the only way an Iraqi biological weapon was going to kill you is if it landed on your head. Because if it missed you, it would put a hole in the ground, break open, and you just got a bunch of goop. That's the reality. Now, Iraq produced a lot of this stuff. They had a massive factory called Al-Hakam State Establishment, huge factory that could produce a lot of anthrax. They had a lot of growth media that they bought. Growth media is a fancy term for food. It's what you put in the little fermenter with the bugs, and they eat it, and they grow, and they multiply, and that's how you get anthrax. A little bit more complicated than that. I told you I'm not a biologist. But when we took a look at the Iraqi factory, remember the Iraqis had lied about anthrax, lied about biology for 4 years. When they finally admitted it, we went to the factory that we had been monitoring because we suspected it was a biological factory. We said, all right, how much anthrax did you produce? They said 8,000 liters. And we took a look at the size of the factory and the amount of growth media. We say, no way, Jose. It doesn't work that way. This factory at maximum production output with all this growth media operating for the length of time that you said could produce 10 times that much. 80,000 liters. And you say you only produced 8? Nah, we're not falling for that game again. You lied to us before. No, we really only produced 8,000 liters. Can you give us the production logbooks? Nope. So because Iraq lied to us, we now said our figures on anthrax production are 80,000 liters. And until you can demonstrate that you produced less than that or account for the 80,000 liters, we're not giving it to you. Notice what I'm saying, though. It's a hypothetical number. It's not based on intelligence. It's based on an assumption. We say Iraq has biological weapons capability because we don't believe their story, not because we have intelligence information that says they have it. So that's part of that missing 5%. But let's bring this into focus more. Liquid bulk anthrax, under ideal storage conditions, germinates in 3 years, becomes useless. So even if Iraq had this material and hid it from us successfully, which is highly unlikely, it's no longer viable. The same holds for their chemical weapons. Shelf life of 5 to 7 years, no longer viable. So when I speak of disarming Iraq to 95% level, I talk about eliminating 100% of the production equipment, 100% of the factories, and I'm telling you that remaining 5% doesn't matter anyways. What I'm telling you is that Iraq has been disarmed. Disarmed. Furthermore, when people say today that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction capability, like biological weapons or chemical weapons, I ask them, how? How do they have it? And they keep pointing back to the fact that Iraq lied initially. But the bottom line is for Iraq to have weapons of mass destruction today, they would have had to rebuild a manufacturing base since 1998 when inspectors left. And until someone can demonstrate this, you don't have a weapon of mass destruction. You don't have a threat.